It's Sunday afternoon. I love all y'all. I want to do a short program because it's about all I have time to do. With it being Sunday, it may be all the time you have to watch. We finished with chapter 22 yesterday in the Acts, and now we will pick up with the beginning, chapter 23. It is a long chapter, and it is a narrative chapter, so it may go a little faster than we expect, but we don't know. Chapter 23. Hope you all went to church today. Go back tonight. Pray. Support your brethren. Do everything decently and in order, so that all will know that thou walkest orderly and keepest the law. That was in our lesson a few days ago. Chapter 23, the Acts. And Paul, earnestly beholding the council, remember he'd just given his defense to the Jews, and then they decided that they wanted to kill him. Away with such a man from the earth, because he said Jesus sent him to the Gentiles. And so they kept him overnight. And the next day they loose him. They command the chief priest and all the council to appear. They bring Paul down and set him before them. He is not bound. And Paul, chapter 23 of the Acts, verse 1, and Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in good conscience before God unto this day. And the high priest, Ananias, commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. There had been several high priests. Annas was gone. Caiaphas was gone and be long dead. And Ananias is the high priest now. The high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by Paul to smite him on the mouth. I have lived in all good conscience before God unto this day. Blah! You see, if you live in good conscience and it doesn't agree with someone else's good conscience, they're liable to shoot you or slap you down or put you in jail or make you a social pariah, make you a non-person, cancel you, flush you down the social toilet. You're a nobody. You're a never was. A complete unknown. And Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God unto this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. You can only live, when you live in good conscience before God, there will be people that will strike you down. They will kill you if they can. Always remember that. The devil hates you. The reason he hates you is because you love Jesus. If you're a Christian, the devil automatically hates you, and he's going to do everything in his power, which is quite a lot, to see that you fail in your Christian walk and that your faith becomes weak and collapses and tatters like a cardboard outhouse in the rain that just don't hold up. Get ready to get slapped down. Yea, and all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. Chapter 23, the Acts, verse 1. And Paul, earnestly beholding the council, he's giving them respect, said, Men and brethren, he's giving them respect. He's a Jew. talking to fellow Jews. I have lived in all good conscience before God unto this day. And because he had not lived according to the law of the Pharisees, of which he was one and started out as one, and had accepted Jesus as the Son of God. That's why they hid him. I have lived in all good conscience before God unto this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Then Paul said unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. Remember that? That tickles your ears, doesn't it? That's in the Lord's condemnation of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and the lawyers in Matthew chapter 23. It says, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees. This is chapter 23 of Matthew, beginning in verse 27. Good afternoon, Kevin. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye are like unto whited sepulchres, graves, tombs, mausoleums, the land of the dead, sarcophagi. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but within are full of dead men's bones and of all uncleanness. Even so ye also are outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within ye are filled with hypocrisy and iniquity. You like a whited sepulchre. You're likened to a whited sepulchre, which indeed appears beautiful outward, but inside full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness, filth, corruption. Verse 3, chapter 22, the Acts. And then said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. You're full of dead men's bones. And he was, because if he didn't accept Christ, he was walking around with dead men's bones. Then said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. For sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? Why do you smite me contrary to the law? Why would you do that? Deuteronomy 25, verse 1 and 2. If there be a controversy between men, and they come under judgment, that the judges may judge them, then they shall justify the righteous and condemn the wicked. And it shall be, if the wicked man be worthy to be beaten, then the judge shall cause him to lie down and to be beaten before his face according to his fault by a certain number. In other words, you have to be found guilty before you get hit. And we know that's not the way it works in real life, but this was the high priest. Moses is high priest, God's high priest, the teacher of the law. And he had Paul stricken. He smote him outside the law, out of revenge, out of anger, not according to the law of Moses, because Paul had yet to be judged. Then Paul said unto him in verse 3, unto the high priest, Ananias, then Paul said unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. For sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be spit on, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? And they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest? And then said Paul, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest. Paul said, I didn't know he was the high priest. The last high priest I saw was Caiaphas. And so this high priest was just the next one down the line. Paul said, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. That's found in Exodus, I think, in the law of Moses. Well, maybe it's in chapter 21. No. The verse is, Thou shalt, in chapter 22 of Exodus, the second book of Moses called Exodus. It says that, verse 28, Thou shalt not revile the gods, nor curse the ruler of thy people. When it says here the gods, the direct meaning of that is actually the judges or the rulers, the leaders. Thou shalt not curse the ruler of thy people. Paul is quoting scripture back to the high priest, who's going to judge him by the law. And they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest? And said Paul, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. Now, Paul notices something here. He can tell partly by the way they're dressed, and he can talk about partly about how they're grouped together, their attitudes. You know, I can tell Presbyterians a mile away. They just can smell me and know they're better than I am, no more than I do, because they listen to the right idiots on the YouTube. Verse 6, But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Of the hope and resurrection of the dead am I called into question. Now, those are fighting words, you see, because Sadducees don't believe in anything supernatural, and the Pharisees believe in all of it, just like a good Christian ought to. God is supernatural. He's completely outside of nature. He's nature's God only in the sense that he created nature and he sustains it. By him all things consist. He is outside of time and space. So every dealing that he has with us is miraculous and supernatural. But when Paul perceived that the one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I'm a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Of the hope and resurrection of the dead am I called into question. And when he had said this, and I didn't do anything in church this morning but play a song. I have nobody to blame for my stumble tongue. Could it be that at 3 p.m. I have not had yet enough coffee? It's possible. Because I got up later and I wanted to because the light was all wrong. Of course, we set the clocks forward last night. My clocks were all right, but the light was wrong, so I turned over and went back to sleep. Now, when he had so said, that part of that he was a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, and when Paul had so said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided. That's what Paul wanted to do. He could see that they already decided to kill him because they were hitting him when they didn't have any right to hit him, and the chief captain, didn't do nothing about it either, did he? Paul's situation was precarious. At that point, now the chief captain conducts himself honorably, but in this little instance, he was trusting the high priest and his council way too much. They're not to be trusted at all. So when he had so said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. The Sadducees say there's no resurrection, and that's why they're so sad, you see, the Sadducees. But I know that's an old joke, but I still get tickled every time I tell it, and I'm probably the only one. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. And there arose a great cry. Boo! And the Pharisees, the scribes that were on the Pharisees' part, arose and strove, saying, we find no fault in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God. See, the Pharisees are getting behind Paul because he's a Pharisee. And you notice he's not talking about Jesus here. He is using the division between the Christ-hating Pharisees and the Christ-hating Sadducees, and the Paul-hating Pharisees and the Paul-hating Sadducees. But they hate each other more than they hate him for the moment, because my side's right and your side's wrong. So he got the Pharisees and the Sadducees to set up against each other. It's a brilliant move, especially when they seem fixing to take you out with the trash. And there arose in verse 9, chapter 23 of the Acts, and there arose a great cry. And the scribes that were the Pharisees' part arose and strove, saying, we find no evil in this man. But if a spirit or an angel hath spoken to him, let us not fight against God. Remember, that's what Gamaliel said in chapter 5 of the Acts. He said, look, if this work that they're doing is of God, we can't stop it. And if we come against it, then we're going to be fighting against God. We don't want to find ourselves in the position of fighting against God. We don't have any record of it, but we hope that Gamaliel got saved. He was an influential man, and if he had gotten saved, then many believing Jews and Orthodox Jews would have come to Christ through his example, like I'm sure they did because of Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, the great teacher. And Jesus called the Master of Israel. But if a spirit or an angel hath spoken to him, let us not fight against God. Verse 10, and when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, here he's getting involved now, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces of them, commanded the soldiers to go down and to take him by force from among him. Pharisees were going, he's our guy. The Sadducees were going, he's our guy. Paul probably looked like olive oil between Blue Toe and Popeye when they were pulling on her to see which one was going to get the girl. There wasn't enough of her there for one of them, much less for both of them. Back to the story. And when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces, of them, because they're fighting over him, the two sides against each other, commanded the soldiers to go down and to take Paul by force from among them and to bring him into the castle, back into the keep, into the stronghold. And the night following, midnight, the Lord stood by Paul. And the night following, the day, that night, the night following, and the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, "Be of good cheer, Paul. For as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome." And Paul always said he was going to Rome. He was headed for Rome. He was going to go to Rome as soon as he got through Jerusalem. That was his plan. But God had other plans. Paul planned on going to Rome as a missionary, then going on to Spain. It didn't work out. He went to Rome as a prisoner and he never left. There are some who say he did. I can find no evidence of that. If you show me evidence that he left after he was taken into custody, if you show me that he was ever free again after he was taken into custody in Jerusalem by the Romans, where they took the custody away from the Sanhedrin, the temple. If you can show me any time he was free after that, I'd be willing to look. Now, don't show me some paper that a God hater and a guy who doesn't believe in the Bible wrote in 1962 or 2021. I'm going to see that. Show me in the Bible, and I'll believe you. Good old Susie from Lahore, Pakistan. The Lord is with you. I saw your service this morning. It's probably late at night where you are, or maybe it's tomorrow morning. I don't know what time it is in Pakistan. I know it's a long time past what it is here. 9 hours, 10 hours, something like that. Thank you for watching. God bless you. And we have Charles watching us also. See, Paul expected to go to Rome, but he didn't expect to go as a prisoner. And that's how God is deciding to send him. And I want you to look at how Christ phrases this, because to me, it confirms the idea that Paul was never again a free man. I know that this is an idea that picked up traction in the 70s. I just can't find any internal, epistolary, or a patriarchal early church writings. I can't find any support for it. So it was an idea that he was free again after he was taken to Rome. But I think Jesus confirms that he's going to go to Rome and not be a free man because of the way that the Lord Christ phrases it here. Verse 11, let's take one more look at it. We have time. I know I told this would be a short program. It will be a short program because this is a short section. And this entire chapter is herky-jerky enough to where there are only a few good places to stop, and this is one of them. Verse 11, chapter 23 of the Acts. And the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, "Be of good cheer, Paul." What does that remind you of? Reminds you of the upper room, doesn't it? Where Jesus said, "These things have I said unto you, that in me ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." Be of good cheer, Paul. For as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. As thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. How did he testify in Jerusalem? As a prisoner. How will he testify in Rome? as a prisoner. Is this conclusive? Not by just the one verse. Good afternoon, Pastor Shaw. God be with you. I hope that we'll see you some during the evangelism conference. I know my old friend Vera Smith loves going to your church. She's always bragging on you. And I enjoyed getting to meet you that day at your annual meeting. Grace is one of my favorite churches. I preached there several times and I like it a lot. It reminds me of older, less complicated times. But then everything does, doesn't it? You're doing a great job there, sir. God bless you. But I believe that that's how what Jesus meant. He says, as you've testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness of me at Rome. You gave your testimony here, not in your bathing suit, not in a Panama hat, but as a prisoner. And you will also bear witness of me at Rome as a prisoner. More than one time, the great apostle referred to himself as the prisoner of the Lord. There's nothing wrong with that. We've awakened unto righteousness and we're no longer sin's to slave. We just have a new master. We're still slaves, but we serve a risen Savior. And now we follow him, not in chains, but because he saved us from hell and from the wrath to come. God bless you. We'll continue this tomorrow.